The walls of Pinewood Home for Children were painted in faded blues and greens, an attempt to mask the unmistakable scent of industrial cleaner and lost hopes. My name is Sophia Pierce, and at 6 years old I had already learned the most valuable lesson life could teach me. I was invisible. Not literally, of course. My physical form occupied space like any other child, but in all the ways that mattered, I might as well have been a ghost. The social workers saw a file, not a child. Potential parents saw a statistic, not a person. But what none of them realized was that my invisibility had given me a power they couldn't comprehend, the ability to observe without being observed. While the other children competed for attention with noise and drama, I had discovered that true influence resided in stillness and vigilance. Each day, I retreated to the small corner library, a forgotten nook that smelled of dust and aging paper. Books became both my sanctuary and my education. I devoured stories of justice and retribution, of overlooked heroes who ultimately prevailed. Even then, I was collecting tools for a future I couldn't yet articulate. On a crisp autumn afternoon, when the windows were streaked with rain and the other children were being paraded before visitors in the main hall, I remained in my corner, absorbed in a book about mythological creatures. The dragon on the cover was worn from years of small fingers tracing its scales. That's quite an advanced book for someone your age. I looked up to find an elderly man peering down at me. His hair was the color of polished silver, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, studied me with genuine curiosity rather than the practiced sympathy I was accustomed to from adults who visited Pinewood. "I'm Walter Kingsley," he said, extending a hand as if I were an adult worthy of a proper introduction rather than a child to be patted on the head. "And why aren't you with the others meeting potential families?" "Those aren't potential families," I replied, closing my book carefully. "They're tourists. They come to feel good about themselves, then leave without the inconvenience of actually taking anyone home." Instead of being offended, Walter Kingsley laughed, a rich, surprised sound that seemed to shake years from his face. He lowered himself onto the small chair beside me with a slight wince that suggested his knees protested the movement. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia Pierce." "And what are you reading about Sophia Pierce?" "Dragons," I said, showing him the cover. "They're powerful but misunderstood. People always think they're the villains." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most interesting characters are the ones everyone misunderstands." He studied me for a moment before asking, "Tell me, Sophia, what do you want to be when you grow up?" It wasn't the question that surprised me. Adults always ask children some version of this, but rather the way he asked it, with genuine interest instead of condescending amusement. "I want to take care of people that everyone else forgets about," I answered honestly. Something shifted in Walter's expression, recognition, perhaps, or some private understanding. That's an unusual ambition for someone so young. "I notice things," I said simply. "Yes," he replied, "I believe you do." That afternoon changed everything. Walter Kingsley, I would learn, was a 67-year-old investment magnate whose charitable foundation supported various children's causes. He didn't adopt me, that wasn't what either of us needed, but he offered something far more valuable, a promise. "I'll fund your education, Sophia," he said before leaving that day. "Every step of it. All I ask in return is that someday, when you're able, you help someone else who's been forgotten, just as you said you want to do." I extended my small hand, and he enveloped it in his much larger one. Neither of us could have known then that this simple agreement would evolve into a strategy spanning decades, a calculated path to justice that would take years to unfold. Or perhaps Walter did know. Perhaps he recognized something in me that day, a mirror of himself, or possibly the instrument of his future salvation. It would be many years before I understood which. From the moment Walter Kingsley entered my life, I began documenting everything. Each letter, every gift, all financial contributions. I preserved them in acid-free folders, creating an archive that would one day serve as both evidence and emotional leverage. At 10 years old, I couldn't have articulated the purpose of this meticulous record-keeping, but some instinct drove me to treat each interaction as a piece of a puzzle I was slowly assembling. When it came time to choose a school, I deliberately selected Westridge Academy, an elite private institution where old money and new ambition collided. I remained an outsider there, the scholarship student whose clothes came from department stores rather than designers. This isolation didn't trouble me. Instead, It strengthened the emotional armor I was building, teaching me to find worth in achievement rather than acceptance. I focused my academic energy on subjects that dissected human behavior: psychology, physiology, sociology. While my classmates pursued popularity, I pursued understanding of the systems that govern their interactions. By 14, I had begun researching elder abuse statistics and legal precedents regarding family obligations to aging parents. My teachers found my interests unusual but impressive. They didn't recognize them as weapons being forged. Through careful correspondence with Walter, I began constructing detailed profiles of his children, Michelle and Christopher. I noted how Walter's mentions of family visits decreased over the years, while his health concerns increased. His letters gradually shifted from enthusiastic accounts of business achievements to philosophical reflections on legacy and regret. "The truest measure of success," he wrote when I was 16, "isn't what you accumulate, but what you leave behind that improves the world. I've built buildings that will stand for generations, but I'm less certain about the values I've built in my own home." I crafted replies that extracted information about his children's neglect while positioning myself as the loyal confidant he clearly lacked. When teachers asked about career aspirations, I spoke of nursing with a focus on geriatric care, a choice I presented as inspired by volunteer work, but was in fact a calculated position in my developing strategy. By the time I finished my nursing degree, I had added certification in elder law and financial abuse prevention. I carefully selected employment opportunities near Walter's residence in Lakeview Heights, explaining the geographical choice as desire for experience in prestigious medical institutions rather than revealing my true motive: proximity to enable rapid response when needed. Some might call what I was building an obsession. I preferred to think of it as a promise being methodically prepared for fulfillment. 20 years after our first meeting, I had built a network of contacts throughout the luxury elder care community in the Lakeview area. I maintained these connections through occasional consultations and continuing education seminars, establishing myself as an expert while gathering intelligence on facility practices and personnel. When my phone vibrated with a text message from Diane, a medication nurse at Silver Lake Manor who owed me a favor, I knew immediately that the moment I had spent 2 decades preparing for had arrived. "New admission today. Thought you'd want to know W. Kingsley. Conditions stable but declining. Family-initiated placement." I took a single deep breath, closed my eyes, and allowed myself 10 seconds to appreciate the culmination of my patience. Then I began implementing my long-established plan. Within 3 days, I had applied for and secured a transfer to Silver Lake Manor, accepting a lateral move that my supervisor questioned as career regression. "This is actually perfect timing," I explained during my exit interview. "I've been wanting to gain experience in a more exclusive care environment, and Silver Lake has that reputation for personalized treatment approaches." My expertise in geriatric care and impeccable references made the position as charge nurse on Walter's floor almost too easy to acquire. I arranged my schedule to maximize contact with him while minimizing interaction with his family, whose visiting patterns I needed to document objectively before revealing my identity. The first time I entered Walter's room in my professional capacity, I experienced a moment of doubt. The commanding presence I remembered had diminished into a thin figure whose silver hair had faded to white, whose sharp blue eyes now appeared clouded with medication and resignation. At 87, Walter Kingsley showed the distinctive signs of a man who had been gradually surrendering to isolation long before his physical health began to fail. "Good morning, Mr. Kingsley," I said, checking his IV placement with practiced efficiency. "I'm Sophia, your charge nurse for this floor." He nodded vaguely, his attention focused on the window rather than on me, the exact opposite of our first meeting all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now I was visible, uniformed, officially present, while he had begun his own journey into institutional invisibility. Over the following weeks, I meticulously documented every aspect of Walter's care and his family's involvement, or more accurately, their lack thereof. Michelle visited twice, spending exactly 47 minutes the first time and 32 minutes the second, her attention divided between her father and her phone. Christopher managed one appearance, bringing an assistant who took notes about Walter's condition while Christopher remained in the hallway, ostensibly taking an important call that lasted throughout the visit. Meanwhile, I monitored their social media accounts, capturing screenshots of Michelle's yacht vacation in the Greek islands and Christopher's skiing trip to Aspen, both occurring while their father was being treated for pneumonia. I reviewed Walter's chart repeatedly, noting a recent change in financial power of attorney that coincided with a series of unexplained withdrawals from his personal accounts. I provided exceptional care to Walter, implementing personalized treatment protocols that gradually improved his physical condition and mental clarity. I brought him books similar to those he had mentioned in his letters over the years and prepared his tea exactly as he had once described preferring it, Earl Grey with a precise half-teaspoon of honey. One afternoon, when Walter was strong enough to sit in the garden courtyard, I decided the time had come for revelation. I arranged a private setting in a corner shielded by Japanese maples, brought his tea on a tray with a cloth napkin rather than the paper ones used by the facility, and placed beside it a book, the same dragon-covered volume I had been reading the day we met. "Your tea, Mr. Kingsley," I said, setting the tray on the table beside him. He thanked me absently, then his eyes fell on the book. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the worn cover. "This book," he murmured, "I've seen it before." I took the seat across from him. "Yes, you have. 20 years ago at Pinewood Home for Children. A little girl was reading it instead of participating in the family meeting activities." Walter's eyes, suddenly sharper than they had been in weeks, fixed on my face. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. "Sophia Pierce," he whispered. I reached into my pocket and withdrew a folded letter, yellowed with age but preserved in perfect condition. I handed it to him wordlessly. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. His own handwriting, from the first letter he had sent after our meeting, promising educational support and expressing his belief in my potential. "I kept every letter," I said quietly. "Every note, every record of your generosity." "All this time," he said, his voice catching, "you planned this. You saw me when I was invisible, Mr. Kingsley. I made a promise to you once. Now it's my turn to fulfill it." "My children," he began, "have abandoned you," I finished for him. "Just as others once abandoned me. The difference is you won't remain forgotten. I'm going to make certain of that." The tears that filled his eyes contained recognition of a truth he had likely been avoiding for years. "How?" "I have a plan," I replied, reaching for his hand across the table. "A way to ensure your dignity and your legacy while addressing your children's betrayal, but only with your consent." Walter's fingers tightened around mine. "Tell me." The following weeks unfolded according to a strategy I had refined over decades. First, I implemented specialized care protocols that rapidly improved Walter's health. His cognitive function sharpened, his physical strength returned, and with it came a clarity of purpose I recognized from our earliest interactions. Meanwhile, I maintained meticulous records of all attempted family contacts. Each call from the nursing station to Michelle and Christopher, each canceled visit, each abbreviated stay when they did appear, all documented with timestamps and witnesses. I engaged Margaret Chen, a trusted elder law attorney I had worked with on previous abuse cases, to review Walter's recent financial transactions and power of attorney changes. "These withdrawals," Margaret noted during our confidential meeting in Walter's room, "nearly $200,000 over the past 8 months, all after the POA was transferred to Christopher. The timing is suspicious, especially given that none of these funds appear to have been used for your care." Walter's jaw tightened. "The vacation homes," he said quietly. "They were renovating them with my money." "We can challenge this," Margaret assured him. "There's a clear pattern of exploitation." Together, we helped Walter review his existing will and estate planning documents. The vulnerabilities were immediately apparent. Contingencies that had seemed reasonable when drafted now stood as gateways for further exploitation. When everything was prepared, Walter requested a family meeting. I arranged for it to occur on a Wednesday afternoon when I would be on duty, ensuring medical staff witnesses were present and recording equipment was discreetly positioned. Michelle arrived 15 minutes late, dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a family discussion. Christopher arrived 20 minutes after her, immediately checking his watch and announcing he had another commitment in an hour. Neither of them noticed the subtle changes in their father, his straighter posture, the clarity in his eyes, The deliberate way he had positioned himself at the head of the conference table rather than in a wheelchair as they were accustomed to seeing him. "Thank you both for coming," Walter began, his voice stronger than they had heard in months. "I wanted to discuss some changes I'm making to my affairs." "Changes?" Christopher interrupted. "Dad, you don't need to worry about any of that. We've got everything handled." "Yes," Walter replied, "that's precisely the problem." He nodded to me, and I distributed folders containing the evidence we had compiled. Bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals, social media posts timestamped during Walter's health crises, and a detailed log of their limited visits contrasted with the medical attention required during their absences. "What is this?" Michelle demanded, barely glancing at the contents before pushing the folder away. "And who is she to be involved in family business?" "This is Sophia Pierce," Walter said, his voice steady. 20 years ago, I made a promise to fund her education if she would someday help someone who had been forgotten. I didn't realize then that the forgotten person would be me." The color drained from Christopher's face as he examined the financial documents more carefully. "Dad, there are reasonable explanations for all of this. The market has been volatile, and we've had to make some quick decisions to protect your assets." "By purchasing a yacht?" Walter asked mildly. "By renovating beach houses I haven't visited in years. Please, continue. I'm quite interested in your definition of protection." For nearly an hour, Walter methodically addressed each piece of evidence, his tone never rising, his composure never breaking. When he finished, he slid a new document across the table. "My revised will," he explained. "I've established the Seen and Remembered Foundation to support education for children in foster care who wish to pursue careers in elder advocacy and care. Sophia will serve as executor. You'll each receive a modest inheritance, contingent upon completing 1,000 hours of volunteer service in elder care facilities." "This is outrageous," Michelle sputtered. "She's manipulated you, can't you see that? You're not thinking clearly." Walter smiled thinly. "On the contrary, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Sophia has shown me what true care means. You have shown me what exploitation looks like. The contrast is quite educational." "We'll contest this," Christopher threatened. "No court will uphold a will changed under duress or undue influence." Margaret Chen, who had been silently observing from the corner, stepped forward. "That's why we've arranged for independent medical evaluation of Mr. Kingsley's mental competence, documented today's proceedings on video, and secured multiple witness signatures to the new documents, including 2 attending physicians and a court-appointed observer who is waiting outside. By all means, contest the will. The resulting publicity would certainly be interesting." After Michelle and Christopher stormed out, Walter released a long, shuddering breath. "That was more difficult than I anticipated." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "They'll try again. They'll pretend to reconcile to care." "I know," he said, "but for the first time in years, their pretense will require actual effort on their part. There's a certain justice in that, isn't there?" The Seen and Remembered Foundation was officially established 3 weeks later. Walter insisted on being actively involved, reviewing applications from the first potential scholarship recipients himself. He selected 3 students specifically for their compelling essays about caring for elderly individuals who had been abandoned by family. "This one," he said, tapping a photo of a young man named Marcus whose grandmother had raised him after his parents' death. "He understands what it means to honor those who came before." Walter's health stabilized under proper care and with the renewed purpose the foundation gave him. He lived another 11 months, months filled with meaningful work rather than lonely neglect. As his executor, I managed both his medical care and his legacy planning, ensuring every detail aligned with his wishes. Michelle and Christopher made predictable attempts to reassert control. They hired lawyers who sent threatening letters. They tried scheduling visits when they knew media would be covering the foundation's launch. They even attempted to have Walter declared incompetent, a move that backfired spectacularly when his doctors provided extensive documentation of his mental clarity and the suspicious timing of their sudden concern. The foundation's inaugural event received coverage in several regional publications. The narrative we crafted was subtle but clear. A successful businessman rediscovering purpose through philanthropic work after being somewhat overlooked during his retirement years. Photos showed Walter surrounded by scholarship recipients rather than family, a point not lost on his social circles. When Walter's health began its final decline, he faced it with remarkable serenity. "I'm not afraid of dying," he told me one evening as we sat together in his private garden. "I was afraid of being forgotten. You've ensured that won't happen." On a quiet Sunday morning, with rain tapping gently against the windows, Walter passed peacefully, his hand in mine. His last words were simple: "Promise kept." The will reading occurred exactly as planned. Michelle and Christopher's shock at the inheritance conditions was captured discreetly on video, footage that would later be used in foundation materials demonstrating the importance of elder advocacy. Their subsequent attempts to contest the will met organized resistance from our legal team and Walter's doctors. More devastating to them than the financial impact was the social consequence. Invitations to charity galas dwindled. Business associates became less responsive. The subtle but persistent narrative of their neglect spread through their elite circles, creating the very isolation they had inflicted on their father. 5 years later, the Seen and Remembered Foundation had sponsored dozens of students through nursing and elder law programs. The case study I published in the Journal of Elder Protection, using anonymized data from Walter's situation, had been cited in legislative testimony supporting strengthened elder protection laws in 3 states. On the anniversary of our first meeting, I visited Walter's grave with a small dragon figurine. As I placed it on his headstone, I thought about the circles that life creates, how the invisible child became the visible advocate, how the powerful man became the vulnerable elder, how justice sometimes requires decades to manifest, but arrives with perfect precision when it does. "Some call it revenge," I said softly to the granite marker bearing his name. "I call it a promise kept. The most powerful vengeance isn't what you take from someone, it's ensuring they finally understand exactly what they threw away." Behind me, a group of our scholarship recipients waited respectfully. They wore matching foundation polo shirts, each emblazoned with our logo. A dragon, wings spread protectively around a silhouette of an elder and a child, hand in hand. The most potent revenge, I had learned, wasn't destruction but creation, building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. Walter had given me visibility when I was a forgotten child. I had ensured he would never be forgotten as an elder, and together we had created a legacy that would outlast us both, transforming personal pain into systemic change. This is how true justice works, not in explosive moments of confrontation, but in patient, methodical correction of imbalance. A promise made, a promise kept, a circle completed.